mind bend. Non-ordinary and extraordinary states of consciousness for mind bend creative.
Greg, thank you so much for coming on today. Been looking forward to this interview very much. We've been trying to get it together for a minute, and you've been a very busy person.
Okay.
Congratulations on everything that's happening with Yellowjackets.
Thank you.
You are the primary composer for the show.
Yeah, with my pal Anna Waronker, and we write all the background, what's called incidental music, which in Yellowjackets is very foregrounded, whereas in most shows and movies, the score tends to be invisible. You might hear it, but you might not quite be aware of it because it's really in support of the story and the dialogue. In Yellowjackets, it's this whole other dimension of storytelling that the producers and showrunners really like to push. So it's a big treat for us.
Is that unique in your experience of scoring and working on shows where the music has been such a primary focus for the production?
It's fairly uncommon,
Yeah.
I would say. There are moments in shows where they'll push the music. Obviously, if there's what we call a needle drop, which is a licensed pre-existing song, you'll hear that in the foreground. But that's sort of a different car on the train than what we do, which is help the people seem more in love or help them feel more angry or make the audience feel unsettled with something suspenseful. So it's extraordinarily manipulative music that you don't necessarily hear.
You've been especially busy because the show has really taken off, and I purposefully didn't allow myself to watch anything before the show, before this interview. But hopefully, I'll be able to devour it.
I'll be curious to know what you think. Do you like scary things?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah, I tried my hand at making a scary movie. I don't know how scary it is, but the vibe is there, I think.
Oh, okay, good.
But absolutely. I heard from a friend recently that the music actually has morphed to fit characters as, like, maybe it's the theme song of the show has sort of adapted to fit where different characters are at in the space of the story.
We wrote, especially if you're a fan of kind of spiky, noisy, but very almost operatic 90s alternative music, you will really like the theme.
I am, and that's where I first had familiarity with you. I ran into you in Los Angeles at a sound bath that you were putting together at the Silver Lake Jewish Community Center.
Right.
And that is kind of your style. That sound bath is something that is unique to your skill set and your instrument, which is primarily your voice, right?
Correct. I use the term sound bath to advertise it very, very loosely.
Yeah.
Because everybody's had some experience with meditation music, whether it's ambient music or psychedelic ecstatic music or gongs or singing bowls. This is meditative and it is psychedelic, but it's fairly unique. I don't think I've heard anybody else doing it. It's basically improvised, choral, ambient meditation music. When I say meditation, I tend to do it in conjunction with friends, one in particular named Leah Lyon, who is a yoga teacher. And so she'll do maybe half an hour of yoga, and then we'll go into Shavasana, which is the rest portion of a yoga session. And then I'll kind of take over from there and take it deeper into, I don't even know, it's always interesting to me hearing what people's experiences are after the fact. Some people have pretty intense dreamlike visions when they're listening to it, but where they're very able to remember, to recall it, as opposed to dreams where you kind of try and grasp at it and eludes you. Some people just fall asleep, which is great. Another thing I love about it is it's one of the few performance musical forms where it's encouraged, if somebody's snoring, I know I'm doing a good job, which I appreciate.
It's just another note in the symphony, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
When I came to the experience, it struck me as being particularly psychedelic.
Yeah.
That term is relative for different people with different backgrounds, different experiences, and it's a fascinating term to me. Mind manifesting.
Mm-hmm.
This show is called Mind Bend: Non-Ordinary and Extraordinary States of Consciousness. So for me, psychedelics is always an entry point to a broader discussion of the human psyche, the human condition, our challenges, our triumphs, and tools to gain a better understanding of how we can live an empowered and joyful, giving, generous life. So psychedelic, when you think of that event in particular, the sound bath as a psychedelic moment, what comes to mind for you? How would you explain the psychedelic nature?
It's interesting because when I developed the form, I call them Sabbath sessions, Sabbath being a timeout, and hopefully it's a timeout for everybody there from regular rhythms.
Yeah.
And it evolved out of plant medicine and meditation that I was doing. So it was really the fruit of psychedelic work that I'd been doing for years, which, because I'm me, I think about music all the time, and I really like exploring and hopefully discovering new forms and new styles. And I had been having some questions and some sort of gaps that I was looking to fill in my musical practice, where in my day job, composing for film and TV or making records, it's very formal, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
There's a verse, there's a chorus, there's a bridge if you're making a song. In a TV show, there's a scene, and the scene has very specific structure and beats to it that we're there to support. So I was looking for something that was free and almost like the sonic equivalent of free writing, journaling.
Sure.
Which I've been keeping journals my whole life since I was about 15, and they tend to be like my lyrics, very, very psychedelic, or very dream consciousness, I guess. And so I was also thinking, I was thinking about improvisation in the jazz sense, not stylistically, but in terms of sonic freedom. And I was thinking about the collapse of the music, of the music business, right, in the early 2000s or whatever, and kind of thought, well, what did we originally need music for, and what did we originally use music for? And it was to connect it all back in service frequently of non-ordinary states of mind. Or if you were working in a field or building a pyramid or whatever it was, to take you kind of outside of the restrictions and constrictions of your own body, which gets exhausted and feels pain and gets sunburned in the sun. And so we would make up songs to connect to each other and to transcend whatever very human limitations and experiences we were having, which to me is meditation, psychedelics, and music, and sex, probably. So I was thinking, well, before there was a music business or music industry, what was music and what did we use it for? And I said, oh, right, religion, but pre-religion. Almost like the sounds that led us to create religion, that need, but before there was structure around it. And, well, obviously, there's one instrument that we all possess, and that's our voice. And I'd been singing my whole life, and essentially, really making psychedelic music my whole life, even though I came up through maybe punk and post-punk, new wave, whatever you want to call it. My tastes from early on tended toward the dreamlike, tended toward the ethereal, tended toward psychedelic music. And so it turned out I didn't have to invent anything to come up with Sabbath sessions. It was all already there because I'd been playing with looping pedals and my voice even as early as high school. But it was always connected to more traditional structures. A song, a piece of score. And all I needed to do was sort of extract it from that. And then there was this whole new practice for me.
I guess you could say that dissolution of structure is sort of integral to the notion of work in music or sound being psychedelic in nature.
Say that one more time.
Dissolution of structure. Is that like a core component of the psychedelic nature of the music?
Well, I do think that there is this sense where things gather and break apart. And that is definitely part of Sabbath sessions and jazz, right? You're watching waves kind of coalesce and crash and come together and fall apart. And so, yeah, I think the dissolution, and certainly in non-ordinary states, that's the experience that I have, is a kind of crossing of boundaries, when I was, however old I was when I have a 15-year-old son, so I don't want to corrupt him too soon.
Right.
But however old I was when I first tried LSD, the experience and the thrill, the sort of homecoming sensation that I had was of all of these previously siloed and walled up, like partitioned rooms that had very fixed dimensions, suddenly were porous between the spaces, and had and could move around, right? So everything had more space in which to breathe and move, and what the right and left hemisphere. I mean, now we know this now. I didn't know it at the time. The right and left hemispheres are playing with each other. They're dancing. There's no longer even a differentiation, or so it feels in those states. And that's a kind of dissolution of structure.
Have you been tracking the current state of the term psychedelics in America, at least? Have you been aware of some of the what's happening on like the research side and the pharmaceutical side and the retreat side and just the newspaper covers and magazine articles and online research and John Hopkins and
I've been following it, as much as one can, who has a life and a family. But I'm fascinated by it, and the fact that we are where we are versus, how it was in the 80s or 70s, the sort of scourge of psychedelics, and the fear that the science and medical establishment and even that religions, more transcendent, I don't know, that the more sort of transcendent go-tos in our culture were also cut off from it, always seemed very strange to me, because like music, it's sort of a direct line to divinity and transcendence. It can be.
Can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we seem to at least be attempting, and who knows, we usually botch this type of thing at a certain point. The fact that we're even addressing it in a sort of responsible adult kind of a way, culturally and scientifically, is very, very exciting to me. Do I think that it's going to change the world in the way that, I think when you're a kid and first have this experience, or even as an adult, that there's this tendency to want to proselytize about it? Do I think that it's going to become this kind of psychedelic dreamland where there is no more stigma attached to it and it's treated with the kind of respect and awe that I think it deserves? And be clinical, medicinal, and scientifically sound? It's very interesting. It never has been. So we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's part of an opportunity, like with music, to look at how we interact with this phenomenon, how we interact with this tool.
Yeah.
Because music, like you said, and it's interesting. I was interviewing a friend of mine recently, and she was speaking about how churches have primarily been the domain for the ecstatic experience.
Right.
There's really something powerful about getting people together and then hearing the thundering of voices coming together and everybody and that resonance, and then having the steeple and the amplification,
the whole thing, the candles, the colors.
It's meant to be evocative of something transcendental, psychedelic.
Yeah.
So you don't want to lose purchase on that, special.
Well, I think
forum.
that's going to be interesting and potentially really scary to formal religions, and I think that's a big reason why it was sort of pushed back underground in the 60s or the 70s. There was this fear by the government of losing draft age kids, because the last thing you want to do, if the experience one is, if the primary universal experience that most people have with psychedelics is of oneness and connection, the last thing that makes sense anymore is the idea of us and them. There's no them. So I can understand why it would be scary to a government who's trying, who is
has war on the
has
agenda.
war going on. And I can also understand religions that have done really well for the last few thousand years, that it might be scary that you're no longer getting a symbol of transcendence, body of Christ. You're actually getting a direct line, the visceral experience. That changes one. I think generally, if you're a healthy person, not prone to schizophrenia or other, mental issues, that's miraculous. That we can literally put a plant in our mouth and feel like a part of God.
We're putting plants in our mouths all the time, just by feeding ourselves, and certain foods can make us feel a certain way, and physiologically we can have allergic reactions. It's fascinating, but creating spaces where people feel like they have the right to be invested in what goes in their body,
Right.
and what results from that ingestion. Where are people finding safe spaces to do self-exploration? How do you see it with your own kids? The world, I think it's safe to say that people always feel like the world is a tumultuous and crazy place. Right now, there's no shortage of that feeling at all. What I just want to ask you, what do you think is happening with people right now? What are people up against? Where's the tension coming from? What kind of resolutions are you seeing be put forward?
Well, I think what comes to mind is that word dissolution that you were just talking about, that we were just talking about, where things come together and break apart. Things need to break apart in order to come back together. But we're not great at handling the breaking apart. And I feel like we're still, I don't know, if let's say the 1950s or 60s, there was a sort of common contract and there was a common framework. It didn't serve everybody, but there was a sort of general agreement of like how things are and how things should be. Here's what success looks like. Here's what happiness looks like. And that started breaking down, arguably in part because of psychedelics. The research that was happening that then got in the hands of the people and the kids in the 60s, which sort of pulls the curtain back on that. But if you don't have elders, experienced members of the tribe, let's say, to kind of help you through that rite of passage, it just leads to sort of further dissolution. And I think that the internet which is a very psychedelic invention, kind of just shattered us all. And we're trying to put it all back together. I picture an ant colony who's, I don't know, they're marching in a line with the food. I don't know, do they have a queen? Who knows? They're marching in a line with the food for the queen or the hive or the whatever it is. And, you put like a glass of water in the middle of that line and everything like gets crazy for a little while. And then they sort of find their line, or they make 4 lines, or they, reconfigure somehow. But I don't know, because our lives are short and long. I don't know if in a single span of a lifetime, if that's enough for an entire species to reconfigure. So it feels apocalyptic, but I think it's pretty natural, right? What's happening right now. It's happened before. It happens in different ways. It happens in different eras. But because our lives are short, we're in the middle of it. It feels like the end. But it's just that we're, somebody put like a big glass of technology. We did. We made it. It's beautiful. It's brilliant. And it's truly chaotic or crazy making for us. So we're going a little bit crazy right now, but I don't think it's...
Yeah, it sometimes to me it feels like the technological evolution has rapidly leapt past the spiritual, intellectual evolution of people, and how to reconcile our differences before we have to take on technologies that are so familiar and so different at the same time.
It does feel like, well, and I think that is part of the conversation that's happening right now, that there is so much talk. I mean, that you have this podcast. That I do this meditation music, that I can have a conversation with my mother, who would never have entertained the idea of psychedelics or mushrooms, while I knew her growing up. But I can give her the book. What is it? How to Change Your Mind, and she can understand that, and then we can have a real conversation of, well, what do you think about doing a family ceremony? We haven't done that, but I've been working on it. That is trippy, that I can even have that conversation with my mother. So it's not, while our technological advances do seem to grow exponentially as opposed to our spiritual advances. It really is changing on the spiritual side, or I'm using spiritual on the psychedelic side, on the I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Like what you were just saying, that we need the spiritual to catch up to the technological. It doesn't feel stagnant to me, but the nature of it, it may not be exponential.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to get back to also. Part of ushering in an opportunity for evolution, for growth, is the repurposing of these tools that we're familiar with. Cannabis.
Yeah.
Music.
Right.
Sex.
Yeah.
Like these tools that we have that are powerfully transformative.
Right.
Commonplace occurrences, right? But like what we were talking about earlier, sound, Guantanamo Bay torture facilities, police sirens that have low range frequencies,
Right.
Healing spaces. I think it's been fascinating to watch how more people in this space in particular, I mean, this podcast exists because I started creating journalistic content for a website called Psychedelic Spotlight. They were creating content about what's happening in the emerging sector of medicinal psychedelics.
Right.
And there are more websites that are focused, whether it's microdosing or whether it's retreats for those who are in opioid addiction. And, good grief, like healing is such a huge part of it. And healing is an ongoing process, right? And it's not a limp process. It's an exciting and fascinating process, right? But taking sound, for example, there's more people talking about, I've never heard before in the past 3 years, have I heard about as many sound baths.
Right.
Right?
I mean, we do
Immersive
live in
sounding.
LA too. We should.
Well, but even back home in Kansas City, there were sound events and sound healings and bowls and stuff. Yes, obviously in Los Angeles, there's more of it. But I think it's spreading.
I think so too.
And I think that especially when we were devoid of the public experience of music for 2 years during the pandemic and the gathering together, and that exchange. I got to take it back because you and I both come from, we're both musicians and we both have had bands. And, when you're a lifer, I'd like to consider myself a lifer. We have peers coming up and music seems to mean a lot to young people. I think it's really, really resonates with young people because there's so much going on there psychedelically, psychologically. Some people, it stays in them forever and they practice it forever. And some people bail out and they go into different careers and have families and do different things. You have a family and you're still rocking. But it's one of the first kind of psychedelic things that come upon us, isn't
that's
it?
right. That's right. That connects us to the whole.
Yeah.
WHOLE.
Yeah.
Especially when you're a teenager and you're feeling so trapped in your own physical form.
Yeah.
To have that release is, I agree. I think that's psychedelic.
Yeah. I think that I wouldn't be surprised to see young people innovating with how to create spaces for the observance of the power of music in ways that have not been the traditional experience and exposure to music.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, what we grew up with, the club, the rock club, the venue, there's a flatness to that, even though it's wonderful to gather with people and dance or listen to music. I think once a forum or a format starts to be taken for granted, it loses that religious quality, and or it makes it harder to feel like you're in a sacred space. If it's a dime a dozen, obviously there are a billion rock clubs that are all the same. Obviously, transcendent things happen inside of them regularly, but I think what you're saying is right, that younger people who aren't necessarily kind of indoctrinated into that as the only option to experience music will be coming up with spaces, forums, and formats that are less traditional or less maybe business bound, that can feel more sacred.
Yeah.
And if you enter a space, if you enter a non-ordinary space, it's easier to enter into a non-ordinary experience with music. It's interesting. Music is obviously everywhere now, whereas it didn't used to be 100 years ago or whenever.
Yeah.
And I feel like as much creativity as there is, and as much exciting new music as there is, and I really am grateful to the sort of flattening aspect of the internet. Once nobody could guarantee, once there was no puzzle to solve anymore, there was no one way to be successful or to make a living or to get a hit, people just started making much more crazy music, in my opinion. Like even in pop music, just the productions in like a trap song are so trippy to me, oftentimes. It may sound like a billion other things, and once you put the dumb vocals on it, half the time, you lose the sculptural aspect of the actual music. But there's a lot of weird ass music that is very, very popular right now. And there's so much of it because, again, technology, people can play in the sandbox. However, there's so much music and so little common focus, which is to say there's not, like everybody's listening to a different channel. So there's not as much of the common experience anymore as there used to be, and maybe less of that sort of singular religiosity to it that we had growing up with punk or...
And genres and scenes.
Yeah. And I think just because music is literally everywhere, everybody takes it for granted, and it's free. Everybody takes it for granted, right? And so somewhere in there, if we want to get to what you're talking about, which is a new kind of sacred connection to music, not a new kind, just the old kind, but with new music.
In a different era.
Yeah, in a different era.
Yeah.
That's, I think, yet to be figured out. But I do think, certainly historically, it's what people do. We seem to need music. So hopefully we will figure that out, because it would be a shame.
I've always considered myself lucky that I love the creation of music so much. I have that time where I would really kind of rather be at home in front of my computer creating new soundscapes than going on vacation, really. Like, to me, that's like the best time I can get to. And then the other part of that is performance. What an incredible flow state to inhabit. That's my truest flow state, is on stage performing with a band and singing and feeling that process going through. And that's not everybody's thing, but still, like, we know there's so many people that want to go to shows and that want that music
people want
matters
to feel
to them.
that what is it? That circuit.
Yeah, it's a circuit. Yeah. And you were saying how music is kind of everywhere now, and there's a lot of music that's just texture. And right. So if you go to a store in Soho, New York City, to buy some pants, you're going to be bombarded with a certain level of frequency, a certain decibel, and then commercials, and what you're doing too influences emotion for scoring. Can you talk to us about how about that mindset that you get into when it comes to the relationship to creating music for a score, for a piece of narrative film or storytelling?
I've always been I've always been crazy about movies and performance, theater.
Did you do theater? Did you ever act?
Yeah, and that's what I opted not to study music in college, but studied theater. So I was actually doing a lot of sound environments and more things that are closer to Sabbath sessions in college. But that aside, the mindset really comes from the story that's being told and the relationships on screen. What is there and what isn't there that maybe needs to be there in order to complete the circuit of the storytelling. So if two actors don't have chemistry, but they're supposed to be in love, then I've got a really fun little job, because I can make you, on a good day, the viewer, feel like you're in love in that teenage way. We all know a song or pieces of music. Maybe they're classical. Maybe it's something by The Cure.
Tears for Fears.
Yeah, maybe it's Tears for Fears that gives you that feeling. And so I kind of draw from that well of experience and nerdiness, music nerdiness, to to positively manipulate you, right? And to hopefully add whatever missing dimensions there might be in the story or on screen, or just to support what's happening, or sometimes to go against what's happening. But again, that would be something that's missing. It's like, there are two people in love, they're on screen, but we as the audience member know that this is a thriller and that danger is coming. So the music can be that danger to keep you, the audience, on the edge of your seat, where the people on screen may be clueless. It's very fun. It's
How do you stop that from being schmaltzy or too predictive? Or...
Just practice. Sometimes it's too schmaltzy and predictive. And I look back at certain things I've done. I'm like, woo.
Too on the nose.
A little, sometimes. But sometimes that's what you want.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just want to go there. Go for the jugular.
Yeah.
Make them cry. And, usually it's not, I'm not working in a vacuum. Mm-hmm. I'll be working, for instance, on Yellowjackets. I work with my friend Anna. And we're working with the creators of the show, the producers. So there's a whole collaborative team to determine for any given project. And then within that project, for any given scene, where the schmaltz line is. And it's different for every project, because sometimes that's just what it wants. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you want to really go against that.
How were you and Anna brought into that world, and how much license did you know you had to begin with? Because I understand that the music is a pretty crucial character in the whole texture of the show. So what was that process like, and how does production treat that aspect of this?
So my friend Theodore Shapiro, with whom I composed the music for the movie Wet Hot American Summer way back in the day. We got to be super buds and work together and collaborate when we can.
And I didn't realize you were School of Rock too.
Yeah.
I revisited that recently. I saw your name on there. Holy cow.
I know, it's so great. That was such a gift. So Teddy had done Theodore had done the pilot for Yellowjackets. And then it sort of kind of sat there for a year and a half before it sold to a network, Showtime. By the time it sold to Showtime, Teddy wasn't available to do the series. And a mutual friend was one of the producers and a director on it. And so she called me. We had worked together on like a horror short that she had done. And it just seemed like a good fit. Anna and I, meanwhile, had been working. We don't always work together, but we love to work together. Anna Waronker. She and I had just done a comedy, this one called Shrill, with A.D. Bryant, who was on SNL for a long time. And then we had done more of a teen drama called The Republic of Sarah. And we were looking for something dark and experimental. Shrill had been kind of indie pop score, really awesome and fun. Republic of Sarah had been more teen emo melodrama kind of score. And we were really ready to bust out because both of us came up in the 90s playing in kind of weird alternative bands.
Anna did too. She was in,
She was in a band called That Dog.
okay. Yeah.
And so we were just ready. Sometimes we think of it as, our of each project as a different record by a band that we get to be in.
Yeah.
And so if Shrill was was just like a lovely, like breezy indie pop, like sort of weird indie pop record, and Republic of Sarah was our kind of, serious teen emotions record. We were ready to do like the experimental noise.
Yeah,
exactly. The Noise album. And so so when this dropped into my lap, Yellowjackets, when Teddy couldn't do it, I took one look at it. I was like, oh, this is it. And so I brought Anna in, and Teddy and a brilliant singer and composer named Caroline Shaw had done these gorgeous, strange, somewhat austere piano and vocal pieces for the pilot. But then after the pilot sets everything up, but then it just goes nuts for the next 2 seasons, which is where we're at now at the end of season 2. And so we really just got to take the ball and absolutely run with it. And, so we sort of took the idea of the piano and the vocals and some of that choral stuff and just made a bloody mess of it in the funnest way. It's for sure the most psychedelic score I've ever made. Talk about coalescence and dissolution. It just, and there's something very fractal about it too, where genres collide with genres and time collides with time and fragments, and sounds, will go from something quite choral and almost quasi-religious to literally just the sound of, almost like an old woman's phlegm growl. And it'll happen within seconds. So the perspectives are always changing, and the prism is always rotating. So that's how that happened. And once we got into it, the producers were extraordinary, because oftentimes you'll get hired because people love some of your bolder, more noteworthy work, thinking that that's what they want for their movie or their show. And then once you get into it, it's really not what the movie or show calls for or what's appropriate. Mm-hmm. And so you wind up doing something more middle of the road or more traditional. Mm-hmm. With Yellowjackets, it's the opposite. The producers are always inviting us, challenging us, and pushing us to experiment, to go further out. So it's sort of this game of ping pong or tennis that just keeps getting faster and faster and more acrobatic and more almost, absurdly surreal. And it's been a real gift so far.
Is the show a horror show?
Horror plays a part.
Okay.
It's about female relationships and about trauma when it occurs and then the effect of it over time.
Yeah.
And there's some comedy, dark comedy.
Yeah.
And occasionally, it in a really fun way, it plays with soapiness, like a little soap opera tidbits, but in a fun way, in that sort of Twin Peaks way. And horror, like supernatural and also trauma based.
Yeah. I think horror is really fascinating to me, specifically because of how it can be a venue in storytelling and film specifically to talk about trauma. Trauma is a term that comes up a lot in the psychedelic space and in people that I've interviewed and research that people are doing, somatic body work and healing that's going on. And then, I think the way that generational trauma can have physiological effects on our cellular growth and cancer and different ailments, right? So, but I think horror stuff in particular for me, so I tried my hand at making a horror feature film, and to me, I knew what that it meant something to me, but it's not for. There are people who also like horror because they enjoy the kind of excitement of blood and gore and something like that. That was never my feeling. My feeling was more of like the disturbing side of things and shining a light on, just like I've been trying to do with song lyrics and song vibes for a long time. Talk about the weird stuff. Talk about the really jarring and unsettling things, and sort of like integrate that into your power, right? Horror and horror storytelling can be a place to really explore those dark concepts that are part of our lives and that still are compartmentalized and suppressed in ways that are unhealthy, right?
I agree. And there is something very sort of psychedelic, medicinal about that. So when I was a kid, I was always attracted to the more surreal side of 80s horror.
Yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street, David Cronenberg.
Yeah.
Things that were, and then David Lynch. I mean, I wouldn't categorize him as a horror director, but there is
horror elements.
And trauma.
Yeah, trauma, yeah.
But, we're talking kind of about dream states, which are kept at bay in our waking life, just so that we can, drive the got to the store without getting into a crash.
Yeah.
But
the doors of perception must remain.
You got to pick and choose.
Right.
Set and setting. And so, but I think what you're saying about trauma and what we've been talking about in terms of this fractal, this kind of breaking apart and coming together, can all almost be looked at as one thing. These movies, these horror movies, at least, the ones that probably we're attracted to, it is kind of shining. I find it to be very, very cathartic and healing and transcendent, a good horror movie.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I'd ever made that connection before between that and psychedelics, but it makes perfect sense that they're sort of a piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Trauma is on a lot of people's lips these days. And I know some people are kind of put off by that notion.
Well, it might just be the term, these terms, buzz terms.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we cease being able to talk about the actual meaning of the things because we get so reactive to the baggage that comes with the language.
Sure. Did you ever have horrific psychedelic experiences?
I have, not horrific, but I have had some extraordinarily difficult. I had one experience with ayahuasca in particular in New York City.
Yeah.
That it was kind of an evil Matrix experience that was far from over when everybody had to leave the facility and hit the streets. And I felt very cracked open in a way that I had never experienced before. It was, that shattered mirror situation. It was a powerful experience.
First time with ayahuasca?
No.
No.
No. So I was already fairly comfortable in the terrain. It was an anomaly. Generally, that isn't ever my experience. Generally that had not ever. I had never experienced anything that dark and that kind of guttural in a way. That was semi-horrific, but also fascinating, and I think ultimately a positive experience, although I would need to take some time and really reflect on it to remember exactly why. I just remember starting a couple days later, feeling like I feel everything sort of regathering in a new, clearer way. So I didn't feel it was a purely negative experience at all. It was just difficult. And then one other experience I had with ayahuasca, and most of my experiences with ayahuasca have been sensational. After 6 hours of lying there on a mat, just feeling pissy and angry and frustrated and not having the experience that I wanted to have, or that I thought I was going to have, or that I thought I should have. At the end, everybody was sharing. And the experience I'd had, the vision that I'd had, or the one that stuck with me, there are so many, they tumble and tumble and tumble for 6 hours. But the ones that stuck with me at the end were I was stuck in detention after school, staring out the window at all of my friends playing in the playground. And the detention master was me. So that was it. And that was a pretty clear, powerful message or metaphor. And of course, once I shared it with the room, I just started cracking up because it was like almost too tidy, almost too perfect an image.
Yeah.
That wasn't horrific, but it was very uncomfortable and a good. It's one of the journeys that I remember best. Ironically,
Yeah.
those two.
Why have you ever even gone on an ayahuasca journey? What's the point for you of sitting in ceremony with plant medicine in that kind of context and saying, I'm setting aside this time to have this experience and I'm doing it because why?
I mean, I bring different life issues to the table with each ceremony. But there is certainly a common reason, which I don't know if I've ever actually articulated. So I might need to think about it. But I know like when you ask that question, I get a feeling. And it has something to do with letting go and being let go, which is to say, in life, I feel held in good and sometimes not so great feeling ways, held together, held in the vehicle of life, in this body, in these thought habits, in musical habits. And in ceremony, it feels like a cosmic letting go, like I am no longer bound and no longer bound, no longer tethered and unheld together in an extraordinary way. Like, if you think of swaddling with a baby, which is sort of maybe the way that I feel in life frequently, and
As if you're being swaddled?
I mean, it's not a bad feeling.
No, but is that something that you relate to? The idea of being
Yeah.
yeah.
So like there's a swaddling that holds us together in life, for better and for worse. Sometimes it's very cozy, like swaddling is, and comforting, and sometimes it feels like one is bound when you want to break free or be unbound. In ceremony, or in these non-ordinary states of consciousness, I feel unswaddled. And so effortlessly, which is to say, without the need of a guided meditation or without, creating some kind of artificial circumstance for myself, I am water. I am you. I am not even I. I am all. I am music. I am listening. So there's a real rearranging of the mixing board to frequencies and volumes that don't even appear to exist on that mixing board when I'm in an ordinary state of mind, right? You can do a lot with a mixing board, right? But in ceremony, it takes on whole other sonic, visual, generational, informational dimensions that are not readily accessible in waking life, if that makes sense.
Is it fair to ask you point blank what you think is happening in the ayahuasca experience in particular? Because I have heard from, it's amazing to me, the archetypes that pop up for people in these experiences.
That seems so
right?
universal.
Yeah, yeah. And, a friend of mine recently went through her first ayahuasca ceremony, and I haven't. And she went through an experience where she had a direct interaction with what she perceived as Mother Ayahuasca, an entity.
Yeah.
And this entity was like the most knowledgeable and compassionate physician of all time.
Right.
And that entity worked with her to identify areas within her.
Yeah.
That was her experience. My old drummer back home winds up on the floor of the jungle with 3 gray aliens working above him regularly, like psychic surgery, So it's just it's the land of wildest imagination, isn't it? But what do you think is happening? Are we opening our consciousness to other dimensions where timeless ethereal entities can interact with our energetic being?
That's how it feels.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's how it feels, though.
Yeah,
to you,
that is how it feels.
You would say that,
and it's as real as this.
The experience of it is as real as what we feel as waking.
In many ways, the feeling of the experience is more real because it includes this, but has all of these extra dimensions to it, which are not accessible to us here and now. And so there's a feeling of truth to it that life doesn't always have. There's ironically a feeling of boots on the ground realness to these visions, visitations, explorations that somehow connect more deeply to one's core and one's heart and one's habitual thinking that that just feel more resonant, more true, more colorful, more fundamental than what we're able to access. We have a limited bandwidth. We're very limited, as all living creatures are. We have our limitations, and it's what makes us who we are. Mm-hmm. What's crazy is that we have access to this unbounded self. What that means, what that unbounded self actually is, this feeling of the one, of being part of the one, is, I have no idea what it is. Sometimes in the moment I do, but like a dream, once I'm back, all I have are these metaphors, are these sort of words.
Yeah.
It's truly transcendent. It's and it does feel alien, and it does feel eternal, and it does feel boundless.
Why do you think you were drawn in this lifetime to the creation of music to begin with?
For exactly what we're discussing.
Yeah.
Boundlessness, transcendence, connection, the circuit, the one. And I was going to say, because it's fun to dance, but dancing is the same thing.
Yeah.
Dancing, laughing, music, sex. These are all these moments of unboundedness where and non-differentiation, which I think we all have a yearning for that. Yeah. We probably come from it, and we probably go back to it. And so why wouldn't we miss it while we're doing this bit?
And there's kind of never enough of it, right? Like I don't think there's enough of dancing around the fire and swaying and getting voice up together.
Yeah.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
To draw our conversation, which I'm very grateful for, to a slow conclusion. Mm-hmm. I want to flash back to kind of what we were talking about before we were taping, and my first experience of your work as a musician, you exploring that space and sharing that exploration with people out there in the world who maybe you'll never meet, but you affect, which I think is a beautiful, beautiful thing. So your music with Shudder To Think was very powerful to me as a young person coming up, and as you're forming and you're becoming an autonomous individual, and you're in your home, wherever you're at, and you hear things that resonate for whatever reason. Some band or some artist or some message will resonate with you more than another. And we enter these spaces where, maybe we've snuck out of the house, or maybe we've got permission, or maybe we wind up in a basement or a garage or a show somewhere where people are all together and they're watching the artist explore and share, and everybody's feeling that. It's a very powerful time. So the music of Shudder To Think, for me, in high school when I first discovered that, something resonated, and like I told you before, I was playing music. I never considered myself to be punk because I couldn't tell people that I didn't care for them, and I didn't not care what people thought of me. I did, and I was pretty obedient of my parents in a strict home. But I had a lot of emotion, and I definitely needed to scream. And so music that was called emo, made sense to me. It had that sort of hardcore energy, but there was something that was a little bit more lyrical or a little softer about it in a way somehow.
It had a nice, what we were talking about earlier, it had a balance of masculine and feminine, if we want to use those sort of binary terms. Which is just vital. Otherwise, where are you headed if you're not if you're not working on all of it?
I didn't really identify with a lot of the macho energy that seemed to be associated with a lot of the punk and the more like moshy
Yeah, same,
vibe, right?
same.
But the music of Shudder To Think, in particular, the Pony Express record, which is the first record that I heard, which I was always insecure at age 15 and 16 for not knowing the records that came before.
Right,
you know,
right,
there was
right.
always that guilt trip from peers that knew more than you did.
sure,
You know,
yeah.
but what an amazing gift to be able to create an album that's gonna take your art and reach people. And like we talked about earlier, like a single, like X French T-shirt, which was pushed as a single by the record label and maybe by the band too, but that resonated with so many of my peers also in a very special way. What an alchemy, Craig.
Thank you. It's a gift to get this back, because at the time, that was how we felt, and that was all we were trying to do, was send a bat signal out to our people in whatever strange, unique shape it took. And so this far down the line, I mean, 30 years, I don't know, 25, 30 years, I don't even know. It's very gratifying to hear that. And it reminds me of the gifts I continue to get from artists who did that for me, and how music is unbound in that way. How it sort of, it's like a secret that gets passed around. And it really doesn't, and to go back to your question earlier, that's why we do music, is because it exists outside. It is actually, it feels more eternal.
Yeah.
It feels like something that can spill out of the mortal container. It's a great infection, I think.
It's important to us somehow,
Yeah.
isn't it? Like on a very primal level, to
Very.
be connected with that which is beyond us.
Yeah.
There's so much more I would love to talk to you about in this space, but I'm very grateful that you were able to carve out the time to come down here.
Thank you.
And
I appreciate
open to
it.
the idea when I first brought it up. Also, quite receptive to the idea, which it made a lot of sense to me, and I'm glad it ultimately made a lot of sense.
I love talking about all this, so hopefully we can do it again.
I'd love to. Congratulations on everything with Yellowjackets, everything you've had the chance to be a part of in the past, and everything you'll be a part of in the future.
Thank you.
And being a parent and
Thank
being
you.
able to
Thank you.
introduce your family to your music and
Being able to force my 15-year-old to listen to Pony Express record.
I guess what a drag. Was there anything else you wanted to touch on in this little capsule today?
Just that I appreciate you wearing your Residents shirt, because I feel like it connects to everything we've been talking about. Because the Residents were one of those bands or performance groups or visionaries who, when I and my friends were 14 or 15 and their world hit us, this would have been pre any kind of mind-altering experiences. The Residents did that, and they were coming from that liminal dream space, cosmic giggle, and they really helped light something for me and some of my friends, and I think it speaks to the psychedelic nature of music and theater and jokes. The
Humor.
laughing,
The
the laughing
prankster.
aspect. Mhm.
Yeah.
The prankster, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think part of what today's conversation has done for me too, as I continue to sort of be a journalist, a speaker, a forum provider in this space, is understanding and de-demonizing the term psychedelic and making it more palatable.
I'm with you.
And because I'm all for people being able to explore themselves and
Like what
The
else?
mystery.
What else are we supposed to do here? While we've got that is the golden opportunity
Yeah.
to explore ourselves and each other and our relationships to explore ourselves, thereby hopefully growing and strengthening our relationship to self and other. That's it.
Fear is the thing that keeps us from that exploration and trying to contain everything so that there's no wild card beyond a comfortable container
Right.
of
And of course, all there
sense.
are wild cards, we included.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful to have met you and for you to give me this time and share with anyone who caught this. And my hope is always that if one person stumbles on the show and can be inspired
It's
by
like,
something in some way. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So thanks, Craig.
Thank you.